In 2013, something happened in Texas that stunned even veteran detectives. A woman was convicted of murder. But there was a problem. There was no body, no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, no confession. In fact, there was barely any evidence at all. Yet somehow, a jury decided she was guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And the deeper you look into the case, the stranger it gets. Because the alleged victim might not have been dead at all. It started in a quiet suburb outside Houston. The kind of place where nothing really happens. Tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes, neighbors who wave when they drive past. 32-year-old Laura Bennett lived there with her husband, Daniel. From the outside, their life looked normal. But behind closed doors, things were falling apart. Friends later said the marriage had been tense for months. Arguments, long nights apart, money problems. Then one evening in May 2012, Daniel vanished. Just gone. His truck was still in the driveway. His phone was on the kitchen counter. But Daniel Bennett had disappeared without a trace. At first, Laura said he had simply left. According to her, the argument that night had been bad. Really bad. She claimed Daniel stormed out of the house after midnight. No luggage. No phone. Just walked away. Police were skeptical. Adults don't usually vanish like that. But there was nothing to prove otherwise. No sign of violence inside the house. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Nothing broken. Nothing missing. Still, Daniel's family immediately suspected Laura. They insisted something terrible had happened. And they pushed police to investigate. Weeks turned into months. Search teams combed nearby woods. Divers searched lakes and rivers. Dogs tracked possible scent trails. But every search ended the same way. Nothing. No remains. No clothing. No evidence that Daniel had ever been harmed. For months, the case went cold. Then something strange happened. Laura began rebuilding her life. She sold some of Daniel's belongings, closed his bank account, and eventually, she filed paperwork declaring him legally dead. To detectives, that was suspicious. But legally, it wasn't a crime. When someone disappears for long enough, families often have to handle finances. Still, investigators started looking closer. And that's when the rumors started. A coworker claimed Laura once joked about being free soon. Another neighbor said they heard shouting the night Daniel disappeared. But when police followed up, the stories didn't match. Times changed. Details changed. Memories got fuzzy. And none of it could prove a murder. Still, prosecutors believed something had happened inside that house. They just couldn't prove what, or how, or when. And they definitely couldn't prove where the body was. Years passed. Most missing person cases fade away. But this one didn't. Daniel's family kept pushing. They spoke to reporters. They pressured investigators. They refused to believe he had simply walked away. Eventually, a new detective took over the case. And he had a theory. A bold one. What if Laura had killed Daniel during the argument? What if she had cleaned the scene perfectly? And what if she had hidden the body somewhere no one had searched? It was possible, but there was still a problem. No evidence. No blood. No body. In most murder cases, those are the things that make or break a trial. Without them, prosecutors rarely file charges. But this case was different. Because the detective believed something else proved Daniel was dead. His complete disappearance. Daniel had never contacted friends again. Never used his social security number. Never touched his bank accounts. Never showed up anywhere. It was as if he had vanished from the earth. Prosecutors argued that no one abandons their entire life like that. Not without a reason. And that reason, they said, was murder. So in 2013, something almost unheard of happened. Laura Bennett was arrested, charged with killing her husband. Even though investigators had never found a body, the trial quickly became one of the strangest in Texas history. The prosecution built their case entirely on circumstantial evidence. They told the jury about the failing marriage, the argument that night, the suspicious financial activity afterward. They argued Laura had motive, opportunity, and something to gain. Freedom, money, a new life. But the defense pushed back hard. They asked a simple question. How do you convict someone of murder when you can't even prove a murder happened? No forensic evidence. No eyewitnesses. No confession. Nothing. The defense argued Daniel could still be alive. Maybe he started over somewhere else. Maybe he wanted to disappear. Maybe he simply didn't want to be found. It happens more often than people think. For weeks, the courtroom listened to speculation, theories, possibilities, but not proof. Still, prosecutors delivered a chilling closing argument. They told jurors that the absence of Daniel himself was the evidence, that his silence proved he was dead, and that Laura was the only person who could explain why. Except she couldn't. She insisted she didn't know where he went, that he left during the argument and never came back. But the jury didn't believe her. After hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. Laura Bennett was convicted of murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison for killing a man whose body had never been found. A case that seemed impossible had ended with a conviction. But the story didn't end there, because 3 years later, investigators received a phone call, a call that would shake the entire case. The man on the other end said something unbelievable. He claimed he had just met someone in New Mexico, a man who looked exactly like Daniel Bennett. Same face, same voice, same name. And when detectives began looking into the tip, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. Someone had recently used Daniel Bennett's identity. And if that was true, then the woman sitting in prison for his murder might not have killed anyone at all. And what investigators discovered next would turn the entire case upside down. 3 years after Laura Bennett was sentenced to prison for murdering her husband, a phone call came in, and it threatened to destroy the entire case. The caller sounded nervous. He told detectives he had been working construction in New Mexico when he met a man at a roadside diner. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but when the man introduced himself, the caller froze, because the name he heard was one detectives in Texas knew very well. Daniel Bennett. The same Daniel Bennett who had supposedly been murdered. The same Daniel Bennett whose wife was sitting in prison for killing him. At first, investigators assumed the caller was mistaken. People misidentify strangers all the time, especially in cases that have received media coverage. But then the caller added something chilling. He said the man had a distinct scar above his left eyebrow, a scar Daniel Bennett had gotten years earlier during a workplace accident. That detail changed everything. Because that scar had never been mentioned publicly, detectives immediately reopened the case file. And suddenly the impossible question appeared. What if the victim in their murder case wasn't dead? The detective who originally pushed for Laura's arrest was furious. He believed the tip was nonsense. To him, it was obvious. Daniel Bennett had vanished without a trace. People who vanish like that are usually dead. And the most likely person responsible was still Laura. But protocol demanded they investigate. So detectives contacted authorities in New Mexico. They pulled surveillance footage from the diner mentioned by the caller. And when the video arrived in Texas, the room went silent. Because sitting at a booth near the window was a man who looked almost identical to Daniel Bennett. Same build, same posture, same facial structure. Even the way he tilted his head while speaking matched old footage. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone said what everyone was thinking. Is that him? Detectives zoomed in on the footage, frame by frame. The resemblance was undeniable. But there was one problem. The man in the video had a beard. Daniel Bennett had never worn one. Still, the resemblance was disturbing. Enough that investigators decided to dig deeper. They ran facial recognition comparisons. The software returned a 78% match. Not enough to confirm identity, but way too high to ignore. Then they checked something else. Credit card records from the diner. And that's when the case took another strange turn. The man in the video paid with cash. No name, no card, nothing to trace. It was as if he didn't want to be identified. Meanwhile, word of the possible sighting spread inside the legal system. Laura Bennett's defense attorneys were furious. They filed an emergency appeal. Their argument was simple. How can someone be in prison for murder if the victim might still be alive? But prosecutors pushed back. They said the video proved nothing. People look alike all the time. And Daniel Bennett had been missing for 6 years by that point. 6 years without contacting friends. 6 years without accessing bank accounts. 6 years without using his social security number. To them, that still pointed to one conclusion. He was dead. But the story was far from over. Because 2 weeks after the diner footage surfaced, another clue appeared. And this one was even harder to ignore. A small motel outside Albuquerque called police. They said a man had checked in using an ID that looked suspicious. When the clerk looked closer, the name on the ID made her uneasy. David Benton. But the photo? It looked eerily similar to the man in the diner footage. Police ran the ID through their system and discovered it was fake. When officers arrived at the motel room, the man was gone, but he had left something behind. Inside the room was a small black duffel bag, and inside the bag were items that shocked investigators. Several burner phones, stacks of cash, and a worn-out Texas driver's license. The name on the license? Daniel Bennett. Back in Texas, detectives were stunned, because this was the first real evidence that Daniel might still be alive. But it also raised terrifying new questions. If Daniel Bennett had disappeared intentionally, why? And why would he allow his wife to go to prison for his murder? That question began haunting everyone involved in the case. Because if Daniel was alive, then Laura Bennett might be innocent. Completely innocent. Investigators began reconstructing Daniel's life before he vanished. And the deeper they looked, the stranger things became. They discovered Daniel had been hiding financial problems. Huge ones. Secret debts. Thousands of dollars owed to lenders. Even more alarming, some of those lenders were connected to illegal gambling operations. That detail had never surfaced during the original trial, and it changed the entire narrative. Because suddenly Daniel Bennett had a powerful reason to disappear. Debt, danger, and possibly people who wanted their money back. Then detectives found something else. A series of online forum posts under a username traced to Daniel's old email. The posts were made just months before he vanished. They talked about starting over, running away, leaving everything behind. One post read, "Sometimes the only way to survive is to disappear." The message had been written just weeks before the night Daniel vanished. Meanwhile, Laura Bennett remained behind bars, and she had no idea any of this was happening. For years she had insisted on the same story. Daniel left during the argument. She never saw him again. Everyone thought it was a lie. But now, it sounded possible, maybe even likely. The pressure on prosecutors began building. If Daniel Bennett was alive, the conviction would collapse. But investigators still needed proof. Clear proof. And that's when the biggest break in the case happened. 3 months after the motel discovery, one of the burner phones found in the duffel bag suddenly activated. The phone connected briefly to a cellular tower outside Phoenix. Just for a few seconds. But it was enough. Because the phone automatically transmitted its serial number. And that serial number matched one of the phones from the motel bag. Investigators rushed to track the signal. But by the time they triangulated the location, the phone was gone. Whoever had turned it on knew exactly what they were doing. Then came the twist no one expected. When detectives traced the phone's purchase history, they discovered something chilling. The burner phone had been bought 2 days before Daniel Bennett disappeared. And the person who purchased it wasn't Daniel. It was someone else. Someone whose name shocked the entire investigation. Because the buyer was listed as Laura Bennett, the same woman who had been convicted of killing him. Suddenly, the case flipped again. If Laura bought the phone, did that mean she knew Daniel planned to disappear? Had she helped him fake his death? Or had she known where he went all along? Prosecutors seized on the discovery immediately. They argued it proved Laura had been lying, that she helped Daniel vanish and later pretended he was dead. But Laura's defense attorneys had a completely different interpretation. They believed the phone proved something else entirely. Something darker. Because there was one detail investigators had missed. The store where the burner phone was purchased had security cameras. And when detectives pulled the footage, they saw something chilling. Yes, Laura Bennett had been inside the store. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Daniel Bennett, alive, 2 days before he supposedly disappeared. And the footage showed something even more disturbing. The two of them were arguing. Not quietly, but aggressively. People in the store turned to watch. Daniel looked furious. Laura looked terrified. Then Daniel grabbed the phone package from the counter and stormed out of the store, leaving Laura standing there alone. That video changed everything. Because it supported Laura's story. The argument, the tension, the possibility that Daniel left on his own. But investigators noticed something else. After Daniel left the store, he didn't walk to the parking lot. Instead, he walked behind the building, straight toward a dark sedan waiting in the alley. And someone was sitting inside that car, waiting, watching. When detectives zoomed in on the driver's seat, they realized something that made the entire case even more dangerous. The driver wasn't Daniel, and it definitely wasn't Laura. It was a man investigators had never seen before. A man who appeared to be watching the argument carefully, as if he had been waiting for Daniel. And when Daniel got into the car, the sedan drove away, disappearing from camera view forever. Detectives ran the license plate, but it was registered to a stolen vehicle, which meant someone had planned this carefully. Too carefully. Suddenly, the theory of a simple disappearance didn't make sense anymore. Because if Daniel had been meeting someone that night, it meant his disappearance might not have been voluntary at all. It might have been something far more dangerous. And then investigators made a discovery that chilled everyone involved. The mysterious driver in the sedan had a tattoo visible on his neck. A symbol one detectives recognized immediately. It was linked to a violent interstate gambling syndicate. The same criminal network connected to Daniel's hidden debts, which meant Daniel Bennett may not have disappeared willingly. He may have been taken, or worse, forced to vanish. If that was true, then Laura Bennett might have been convicted for a murder that never happened. A murder that might not have been a murder at all. And the real people responsible could still be out there, watching, waiting, making sure Daniel Bennett never returned. Because if he did, he might expose everything. But just as investigators were preparing to expand the case, something even more shocking happened. A detective received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Grainy. Taken from far away. But the man in the photo was unmistakable. Older. Thinner. Bearded. But still recognizable. It was Daniel Bennett. Alive. Standing outside a small convenience store somewhere in Arizona. And scrawled across the back of the photo were 5 words written in black marker. Stop looking, or he dies. If Daniel Bennett is truly alive, someone powerful is making sure he stays hidden. And the deeper investigators dig, the clearer it becomes that this case may not be about a missing husband at all, but about a dangerous criminal network willing to let an innocent woman rot in prison to keep their secrets buried.